January 1980, a National Park Service employee in Arizona sets out on a hike and vanishes, never seen again. October 1996, another NPS employee disappears in Washington state. Months later, her remains are finally found, close to where she first went missing. Stories like these stretch back more than a century, even before the birth of the NPS in 1872. America's national park system is a shining achievement, but it has a dark side. In 1983, one family's trip to Yosemite National Park took a terrifying turn. While in Summit Meadow, they discovered the remains of a woman's arm. 5 years later, other visitors found a skull later linked to the arm. A forensic anthropologist identified the deceased as female, but with so few clues and almost no leads, the case went cold almost immediately. Some investigators with the NPS wondered if serial killer Henry Lee Lucas was involved. His habit of confessing for attention cast doubt on that theory.
There's nobody else going to solve them except me.
When Summit Meadows' Jane Doe was finally identified, the story grew stranger. In 2021, genetic testing in forensic genealogy revealed her to be Patricia Patty Hicks, originally from Spokane, Washington. After a divorce and while grieving the sudden death of her brother, Hicks moved to Merced, California, just outside Yosemite. There she became involved with a cult led by Donald Gibson. In 1981, Gibson was tried for abusing members of the cult, and after being released on bail, he skipped town. He hasn't been heard from since. Hicks appears to have died in the park around 1982. Could a fugitive Gibson have played a role in her death, or was it Henry Lee Lucas who offered details of the scene few others knew? Or was her death the result of some other still unexplained circumstance? The waters of Lake Crescent and Olympic National Park are deep and cold. It might seem like the perfect spot to hide misdeeds, but the eerie reappearance of Haley Illingworth proves otherwise. She was the wife of Monty Illingworth of Port Angeles, Washington. After their 1936 marriage, the couple argued almost constantly until Haley disappeared in December 1937. Monty said she had often threatened to leave. Perhaps, he suggested, she had finally made good on her word. But Haley returned, kinda. In July 1940, fishermen on Lake Crescent came across a woman's body floating in the water. This was no ordinary corpse. Much of it turned into a waxy, soap-like substance through a process known as saponification. Though her face had degraded, other parts, along with her clothes, blankets, and ropes tied around her, remained largely intact. She was so well preserved that officials conducted an autopsy, which showed she had died by strangulation. More detective work based on a distinctive dental bridge finally identified her as Haley, now known as the Lady of the Lake. Monty was convicted of second-degree murder in 1942. Though sentenced to life, he was paroled less than a decade later for good behavior. After that, Monty vanished from the record, but Haley has never left the local imagination. It must have seemed idyllic, two newlyweds off on an adventure in the Grand Canyon, but braving the Colorado River is no easy feat. Not now, and not back in 1928 when Glenn and Bessie Hyde set off through what was then a fairly new Grand Canyon National Park. While others had used rowboats, the Hydes chose a scow. That's a larger oared boat with a small sail. Glenn was an experienced boater, but Bessie wasn't, though she stood to become the first woman to navigate the canyon by river. They launched from Utah in October and were spotted by a few people along the way, confirming their progress through the park. Then the Hydes vanished. Searchers found their scow undamaged and stocked with supplies, but no trace of the couple. The Occam's razor explanation? The couple simply went overboard. And with the river's rushing waters, the canyon's sheer scale, and scavenging animals, it's no wonder no remains were found. But that hasn't stopped wilder theories. A few elderly women even claimed to be Bessie herself, one insisting she killed Glenn. Then, in 1977, a skull with a bullet hole turned up in the home of Emery Cobb, a photographer and boater who had been among the last to see the Hydes alive. Some out there have speculated it was Glenn's, but the evidence never bore this out, so the fate of Glenn and Bessie Hyde remains a haunting mystery. Today, you can visit Kentucky's Mammoth Cave National Park and go on a cave tour with the full knowledge that you'll be fine, so long as you stay with your group. Heed that last point. Mammoth Cave is the longest known cave system in the world, with 426 miles of caverns and passageways to get lost in. Even if you don't get disoriented, the less trafficked parts of the caves can be dangerous, as epitomized by the story of poor Floyd Collins. Collins, a local farmer, had a side business as a cave explorer and ran a small tourist attraction on his property. The problem was, his spot was a bit of a dud because it was simply too inconvenient to get to. So he entered into an arrangement with another landowner to explore the better situated sand cave. But when he first entered it in early 1925, Collins found the passages perilously tight. Even worse, when he tried to exit, his lantern went out and a rock came loose, trapping his leg. If you've seen 127 Hours, you know how this kind of story usually ends.
Get a load of this guy!
After spending a torturous 25 hours alone in the damp and dark, someone finally made contact with Collins. Over the next 17 days, rescuers tried to save the ever-weakening explorer, and the ordeal became a lurid national news story. Despite the efforts of locals, the arrival of the National Guard, hordes of gawkers, and relentless press attention, Collins tragically died. His brother Homer later told the story on the vaudeville circuit to raise money and finally exhume Floyd's remains. Paul Fugate, a monument naturalist at Chiricahua National Monument in Arizona, had a somewhat tense relationship with the National Park Service. He was fired from Chiricahua in 1970 for his long hair and handlebar mustache, but he successfully sued to regain his job and was back on the trails by 1976. In January 1980, he set off for what should have been a quick hike, but never returned. A friend reported his disappearance, and rangers began a nighttime search. That search stretched into 2 weeks and included the help of a local rescue group and a National Guard helicopter. They found no trace of Fugate. With no remains, Fugate was actually fired again for abandoning his post, which denied benefits to his wife, Dodie. The Fugate case has inspired all manner of theories. Dodie hired a psychic who claimed to detect a time portal that allowed her to witness an incident in which Fugate was apparently involved in a crime, perhaps as a witness. Now, I know that sounds pretty wild, but hey, this was the 1980s. First Lady Nancy Reagan even had a personal astrologer who helped her and Ronnie make key decisions.
I'm a very good technical astrologer.
Back to the case. Other non-psychics noted the increasing presence of smugglers and traffickers in the region at the time, prompting speculation that the missing ranger might have been involved in something illegal, or more innocently, encountered the wrong people at the wrong time. But with no remains and little evidence, Fugate's disappearance remains one of the biggest missing hiker mysteries of the last 50 years. The gloriously wild expanse of Everglades National Park preserves 1.5 million acres of habitat and includes key portions of Florida's increasingly endangered freshwater wetlands. Legend has it, though, that before the Everglades officially became a national park, it was home to a killer. At the heart of the story are the 10,000 Islands, a scattering of dry land amid shallow water and mangroves, some of which lie within Everglades National Park. According to legend, this is where Edgar Watson fled in the late 19th century after wreaking havoc in the Wild West. Some reportedly found the new homesteader charming, but others allege that Watson had a murderous streak, claiming the lives of hired farmhands, local officials, runaways, and even a local couple. By 1910, Watson reportedly said he had apprehended Leslie Cox, his farm foreman, for the murders, and later killed him, though he had no body to produce. Watson made his way to the famous Smallwood store on Choccolowski. That's where a local posse attempted to arrest Watson, but he was felled by their guns after his own shotgun jammed. Now, the Watson story should be taken with a heavy dose of skepticism. We know he existed, but was he really a serial killer in the Everglades? Maybe. Watson does appear in court records for killing people, though he kept getting acquitted. No one can confirm the grisly tales, but the thought of them being true is still chilling. This tale of Indiana Dunes National Park begins with Alice Gray, born a city girl in 1881 Chicago. Despite her urban upbringing, she longed to get away from it all and pursued an academic career in mathematics. By late 1915, feeling increasingly unsatisfied, Gray left for the dunes. She lived there for the rest of her life in little more than a tent or shack, attracting attention for reportedly bathing in Lake Michigan without clothes. Locals called her Diana of the Dunes after the Roman goddess of the wilderness and the hunt. She also began to advocate for protecting her beloved dunes as they came under threat from encroaching settlement, but no giant sandworms as far as we know. Then Paul Wilson entered the story. Rough around the edges, he was accused of stealing food and supplies from Gray's neighbors. He served time for that in 1919, but returned to Gray and a seemingly quiet life on the dunes. In 1922, however, the now husband and wife pair were accused of involvement in the murder of an unidentified man nearby, though Wilson was clear of suspicion. When they confronted a sheriff's deputy about this and other accusations, the deputy struck Gray in the head so hard she was hospitalized. Gray eventually recovered and the two returned to the dunes. She died in February 1925 of kidney failure. But legend has it, something of her spirit stayed behind. Visitors to the park have reported seeing a lone female figure along the shore, sometimes taking another swim in the lake. On the Apostle Islands National Lakeshore on Lake Superior in Wisconsin, people still tell a chilling tale of a recluse, a mysterious death, and if you believe in that sort of thing, a ghostly curse. It begins with a man named William Wilson, though accounts of his story were written long after his death. Sometime in the mid-19th century, Wilson built a bare little cabin on what's now called Hermit Island. Tales have swirled about what pushed him to such a lonely life: a broken heart, a lost family, a fight with another man. But those sad rumors never drew as much attention as what Wilson supposedly owned: silver coins. Some even claimed he had a stash of gold. When he was found dead at his cabin in 1861, the place was in disarray. Many concluded he had been murdered for his glittering hoard. Others guessed he'd gone into alcohol withdrawal and died in violent spasms. There's a darker addendum to Wilson's tale. Visitors to Hermit Island in the years since sometimes report strange happenings, with whispers that Wilson's spirit still lingers. In the late 19th century, quarry owner Frederick Prentice began taking stone from the island, even building a mansion there. Some say the reclusive Wilson hated all the bustle and cursed the place. The curse, so the story goes, not only drove away Prentice's bride, but left the mansion to crumble in ruins. Mount Rainier National Park is gorgeous, and by all accounts, Sheila Kearns was excited to work there in the park's Paradise Inn. She was even more excited when she was hired to stay on through the quiet winter season. But just as that season was about to begin in early October 1996, Kearns failed to show up for work. Friends and coworkers told reporters that she was a friendly, happy woman known for treating guests and colleagues with kindness. So when her employers checked her on-site housing, it was puzzling to find everything in order, except that Kearns herself was nowhere to be found. Despite a 3-day search, no sign of her turned up until the following spring, when her remains were discovered at a nearby campground. Though her body was recovered and the FBI got involved, what happened to Kearns is still a mystery. Some believe she suffered an accident or was attacked by a wild animal. Others suspect another person was responsible.
There's also the theory that she was abducted and killed.
But without more evidence, testimony, or confession, her death remains unsolved. For someone who seemed to have no enemies and who clearly loved her work in the park, her sudden disappearance and tragic death are still deeply troubling.